and welcome to Diverse and Inclusive Leaders, the podcast show where I interview the most inspirational and thought-provoking leaders of today and unearth their unique stories of diversity and inclusion to help inspire, educate and motivate others to make the world a better place. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Don Iro. Now, Don is the newly appointed Managing Director for Allteks Ltd. He's had a fantastically international career spanning a number of decades. He's actually founded and run his own business previously called Hamilton Berkeley. And prior to that, he worked for organizations ranging from FTSE 100 businesses through to privately owned organizations where he was client-facing in operational and C-suite positions, working with leading-edge businesses from consumer devices and service development through to delivery, connected vehicles and IoT. More recently, he's worked within the government and the public services arena as an IT service provider. Interestingly, Don was actually born and raised in Nigeria, in the western part of Africa. He spent a lot of his life around 3 different continents, so very international, across Europe, the UK, Asia, China and America. Welcome to the show, Don.
Thank you, Leila. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks so much for joining me. And tell me, Don, I know you're very new into post, but you are kind of old hacks. You're doing a lot of work consultancy-wise with your current organisation. But for those of our listeners who perhaps don't know you as well as I do, as we've spoken previously before, I wonder, could you give us a kind of a potted nutshell history of how you actually came to be where you are today?
Yeah, sure. I can do, certainly. So it all started for me essentially in 2004 when I got onto a Virgin Atlantic plane to the UK to start what was my second degree in the UK. In electronic engineering. So in 2007, finished off as a top 5 in the class, and I went straight into work. And I've worked in, as you mentioned, a variety of roles in engineering, in delivery, etc. And one of the key things that I noticed going through that process was, I always had a North Star. I always had a view of where I wanted to get to as a leader, but I had to cultivate my way through that. And I had some very interesting roles. I had roles from a service delivery to supply chain to program management and general management. But what I found was the consistency in the types of challenges and projects that I worked on, and how that translated to the role that I ended up doing today. And in the past, say, 2 to 3 years. So it's all kind of shaped together. It's all pulled together. And whilst I've had those wide-ranging roles and in different parts of the world, what I bring to the table on a regular basis, and I challenge a lot of my team with, is bringing a totally different perspective to the table, a perspective that transcends a lot of, I would say, social status, that transcends a lot of economical statuses as well, and actually challenges the mindset of the leaders and the businesses to think differently.
That's absolutely fascinating, Don. Thank you for sharing. And tell me, and also our listeners, if you don't mind, a little bit about the personal background. Because obviously you were born in Nigeria and you talked there about, what is essentially kind of upward social mobility and moving into different spheres and challenging the norms, which I absolutely love because you know how passionate I am about moving the dial around all aspects of diversity and inclusion. But I wonder whether you could share a little about the personal background and even, what were your personal drivers? Because you're clearly a very, very ambitious guy, worked for FTSE listed businesses, own business now, at the helm of an organization, driving things forward in this unprecedented time of change. But, what has what has spearheaded the moves that you've made almost?
Yeah, so I've always wanted to be in a position to add value. Right, in a position to be of service. Right, in my early days, sat in a Boy Scouts team or group, if you like, and being parts of different societies and different groups, forward-thinking societies and groups, as well as sports clubs as well. I get pulled into, for whatever reason, into a leadership role. And I started to, I noticed from an early start that, what my North Star was in leadership. from a personal background, growing up in Nigeria and in West Africa, you could call that a developing world or a third world country, depending on how you want to position it. It was always a view of, there was always that opportunity out there that was not readily available to people in Nigeria of my background. And I always thought, why? Why couldn't I be in a position where I could absolutely play on a level playing field as everyone else? So that was my core motivation, to be out of Nigeria, to be in the UK studying in an international university and actually pushing my way in the industry. So, I'll give you an example. I walked into I remember in 2004, I walked into a seminar where there was a bunch of universities recruiting students to come into the UK and study. And I walked into one of those sessions with a view that, I'll just see how it goes. I'll talk to one of these guys and see if I get an offer to come to the university in Southampton. I had a conversation, and within 10 minutes, I was offered a role. I was offered a place at the university. And within 3 to 4 weeks, I was on my way to the UK. So that was quite an interesting and quick change in my life, in the sense that, 4 weeks ago, I was in Nigeria, living a life there with my family, the last of 3 kids, and all of a sudden I was on a vessel flying out to the UK. So, that for me, that just summarizes my sort of my ethos to life, which is, I would throw myself into an opportunity and I'll ensure that, we get through it. So, that sort of backdrop has been what I've taken with me, to all the roles that I've been involved in.
That is so amazing. And I hope you don't mind me pressing into this, because I just find it fascinating. And I'm sure that there's plenty of individuals, listening into the podcast thinking, oh my goodness, wow, 1 minute you are in, as you say, a developing country, where there are, let's face it, there are limited opportunities, unfortunately, for the youth in third world and developing countries to suddenly up sticks and be on this vessel, as you call it, over to the UK. And, I wonder, first of all, you said that you are one of 3. Were you the first to go to university, or were you inspired by others? And if you are in a developing country right now, or you're a student living overseas thinking, God, I've got no opportunity, I'd love them to be inspired by this story. So how and what and why did you just go and do that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good question. So I was the last. So there was a boy, the firstborn. He's late now, unfortunately, and I have a sister who's a medical doctor, qualified from Oxford in the UK. My parents and my family come from a very studied and I would say quite a broad and quite an integrated background. My dad used to be a senior HR professional in one of the largest oil and gas businesses.
Wow.
My mum was a lecturer and a teacher as well in linguistics at the university. And I was always motivated by that. These were people who went out and made a decent living for themselves and made sure that we had, all of the things we needed. I specifically wanted to do a bit more, wanted to take it, 2 steps, or in some cases 5 steps more than what I was exposed to growing up. And in my background, you've got to be one of the 3. You've either got to be an engineer, a doctor, or a lawyer, right? And I ended up being an engineer. So I come from a very well-read, integrated family, and I followed suit. I think there was a view where, I kind of looked back and thought and looked a bit forward and said, am I going to be as successful as I want to be? And I, by all means, have not achieved, 100% success. No one does. But would I really get to the point where I needed to get? Was I pushing myself enough in Nigeria? And the answer was clearly no. So that's what changed the direction. And whilst I've been in the UK, I've been around in China, I've been in the States, I've been around in different roles and in different sort of spheres, if you like. And it's always about pushing myself and understanding that, my role in the industry is of service, is to be able to add value to people and add value to businesses. So what I would say to people who are sat in a similar space that I was in 2004 and thinking about how would they transcend to where I currently am, is absolutely think about your North Star. Think about what you really want to do and what you want to be as an individual and as a member of society. And once you figure that out, you can start to think about the building blocks that you need to get in your current role today or in your current activities today, and start picking those to position yourself to where you want to get to.
I think that's absolutely fantastic advice, and I'm completely one for goal setting. I think when you actually, whether it's even when you write it down, I actually think writing things down is incredibly powerful. But when you write it down, have these goals in mind, as you call them, building blocks, and what is the pinnacle, what is that kind of that self-actualization at the top of the pyramid almost that we want to get to, you can work out what those steps are to put it in place. Because otherwise you could have all the goodwill in the world, but it could not be perhaps directed, or the energy might not be flowing into the right channels, which are going to ultimately allow you achieve to achieve what it is that you want to do. So again, thank you very much indeed for sharing. And I also wonder, kind of on the international side of things. I know you've worked in America and in China and everything like that, which I just think is fantastic. You've got a very diverse lens on the world when it comes to international cultures. And I'm not saying that we aren't like that in the UK. Of course, we've been through, difficult time. Of course, what is Brexit? And, of course, the Corona-19 epidemic that we are living through right now. But, how do you bring other people kind of along that journey when it is that you are, seemingly incredibly open-minded, you're very much about servant leadership, as I call it. How can I serve you? Not this is what I want, this is what I'm going to get. And it's very much about putting other people first, their wants, their desires, to allow the team to go along on that journey. But has it ever been challenging to you when you have been, kind of had this eclectic mindset and explaining to others and bringing other people who have come from a very, very different culture almost on board with the business journey?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is a constant challenge that, we have on a regular basis. It doesn't really matter where you are in the ladder or where you are within a particular engagement. It's a constant question. How do I bring people on board? And I think you raised a good point in terms of bringing people together from the business. That's the key point. What actually brings everyone together. And I find, in those conversations, it's always about a win-win. It's always about understanding the other person's perspective. So, whilst servant leadership is important, you're being of service to people. Ultimately, you're being of service to the business, to the shareholders, to the stakeholders, etc. And in cases where people are absolutely adamant about their own parts of the business and their own strategies and what they actually bring to the table, I think the role I play as a diverse leader and a leader who's worked in multiple parts of the business is that I can look at it and go, what is absolutely important to the business today? What is it we can do? And what is it that the other leaders and the other parts of the puzzle can bring into this conversation or into an engagement to enable us hit those key things? Because at the end of the day, we're in it for a business. It's not it's not personal. It's not an ego trip. We're not in it to be more important than the other person. I think at the end of the day, we've got to be a successful business. We've got to be able to hit particular targets. We've got to be responsible. We've got to be sustainable. And if we can break those into actions, into activities that everyone else can contribute to, I think we'll all get along. And I've had situations where, a director of supply chain, as an example, and a director of procurement, all talking about different things. They all have their own strategies of how they want to make things happen. But at the end of the day, we've got to ship a product. We've got to build a product. We've got to ship a product. We've got to hit a particular revenue. target, so all of those things put things in perspective, and you've got to really have those conversations that are business focused, outcome based, and hopefully, bring the team together.
I'm finding our answers really intriguing, actually, because I have to say, I don't meet that many managing directors and CEOs and such who have come purely from an engineering background, which is very, very interesting, because you're right, you've had, and I think it probably helps a lot in business when you are speaking kind of the language of tech and IT and everything like that, because you do understand all those different facets, but at the same time, what's interesting is the answers that you give. You're very, very, you're very kind of modular in your thinking, so it's all action orientated. Putting things into kind of designated, actionable targets and measures, which is actually, it's fascinating, really, really fascinating. And I do wonder, is that a product, perhaps, of you being, from this engineering and very kind of almost precise background?
It probably is, and also as a my original, I would say, background has been in project management, right? So it's always about getting an outcome done, getting getting a deliverable in place, and I've managed to weave that through in all the roles that I've been involved in. And also, you mentioned the diverse aspect as well. Absolutely, it's always about being in it for a reason, a greater good, an outcome, something that we can all measure, and we can all be pleased with ourselves that we were involved in that, and we can all benefit and enjoy from it. I think, that's the key thing, because I think that's what we all share. We all share the fact that we're in this for a bigger reason. We're in it for whatever is important to us. That's what we're there for. And in a business context, we're there to make results. We're there to be a successful business and all of those sort of things. So that's how I kind of navigate through it.
Interesting. And another question that I had, actually, because it would be remiss completely of me not to kind of address this with you, given your very, very strong kind of IT and digital background. But given we are in what can only be described, I guess, as a global pandemic of incredibly uncertain times, how are you finding coronavirus, I suppose, affecting the business and the people, but also I know how strong you feel about digital technology and making sure that we are ahead of the curve within digital, within the digital frame, globally. I guess that's something that we must, as businesses and leaders, really take on board, especially at a time like this.
Yeah, absolutely. So, at present, we're facing unprecedented challenges, across the spectrum. So across sectors, across industries, across countries, we all know that, right? It's very devastating. But what we're actively doing with Allteks is we've got about 70 customers, and we're actually working with them hand in hand to transition their functional day-to-day and BAU services into a remote working mobile sort of space. And in some cases, we're actually validating their business continuity plans. A lot of businesses set a business continuity plan without necessarily having to trigger it. We're triggering that today. So, and we're working with these guys and these businesses to ensure that they continue to be productive through this process. Now, this is very interesting to me as well, because, I've got a view that, and I made this statement on LinkedIn about probably a month ago, that digital transformation has already happened. Right. It had always happened. I think, the key thing was for people to actually go out and access it. I think in the words of, digital transformation has already happened across sector, across services, and across mankind. And what happens next for us will be various waves of evolution. So we're seeing an evolution today where people are starting to question, those roles that they carry out, and if they really need to be doing those in the office space, etc., etc. So that's the impact that digital has had in the community at the moment. Now, businesses that look into digital as a tool to improve their business processes, their services, and their teams are the ones that are going to win, and we're seeing that constantly. So my I feel very very pleased to be in a way to be able to help businesses to thrive and in some cases grow through this. But the technology is already there. So in some cases, when I'm talking to tech leaders and business leaders, and a lot of the conversations we have is in the lines of "I told you so," but in a very good way, because
Yeah.
we keep pushing the envelope on technology differentiations and simplifying processes, and it's a huge capital investment. But you reap the benefits by having a team ready, no disruption in your supply chain and in your processes. And 1 minute you are working in a crowded office, and within 24 hours, 48 hours, you can be deployed globally. That's the amazing power of digital, and I'm very passionate about that.
And I know that there's many people, well, those who are, I guess, not with the, the kind of the remote working and digital pieces, unfortunately are kind of having mass panics at the moment, because obviously it's stopped and ground businesses to a halt. I'd like to think the vast majority of people that are listening in, them and our businesses are already on online platforms like we are right now. Unfortunately, our business Dial Global is. But, I wonder, and again, I know this is a huge, huge topic, so I don't want to go into too much detail, but just from a top line perspective, what else can we be doing to utilize and harness digital technology from your perspective? And I ask this not only as a business owner myself that has pivoted business to go into an online kind of subscription mode ultimately, which is very much about kind of content and online communication, etc. But what other key pieces can we be thinking about, and should we be thinking about at this time? Because I've heard a number of people now talking about, yes, okay, we're in the pandemic, but what is the exit strategy? And so it's almost like you have said, we've got to think ahead, I told you so kind of situations. How can we be not on the receiving end of someone like yourself who gets digital in abundance saying in a couple of months' time, well, I told you so? What can we do?
Yeah, absolutely. It's about looking at your processes, right? As a business owner, as a stakeholder, is looking at the processes you currently operate today. How do you take products to the market? How do you interact with your customers, and work that through and understand what the tools and the technologies are available at the budgets that you have to be able to position those. Now, in some cases, by working through that process activity, you'd identify a number of processes that are either redundant or could be automated by technology. And then you start to make your decisions about how you go about procuring the right technology and the skill sets to implement those. But this is the right time to think about the processes. So the right time to think about the product offering and how you engage customers. And we shouldn't be scared of getting involved in technology and digital. It might be a huge capital expense in some cases, but not all technology and digital technology systems and tools are expensive. So I'd advise people to engage with their technology teams, engage with their IT directors, and talk about the business processes. Work the business processes in a way of continuous improvement, in a way of thinking lean, in a way of trying to develop a workable flow at low cost to the business, low operational cost to the business, and think about the technologies to power those.
That's really good, really, really good advice. So in summary, we have a look at our processes, we have a look at our technology, we look at the product offering and how that is being delivered to our customers. And you mentioned there kind of your continuous improvement, your lean, manufacturing directors and such probably listening and thinking, yep, Six Sigma and everything like that. But to the everyday individual, as a kind of a layman's view, we look at every facet of what we're doing and the modules almost, and how can we streamline that through utilizing cost-effective technology.
Correct.
Cool. Right. Got it. Sorry, and just back again on this subject, I could ask you a whole million questions, and I will try not to do so too much. But what impact do we think the technology as well as having on inclusion? Because, of course, now so when we are in this pandemic of, almost being lonely and isolated, and I think I've spoken to a number of leaders who are struggling, whether it be about their mental health or whether it be that they are feeling isolated and away from the outside world. What impact do you think tech will have when it comes to inclusivity for teams and mental health or other aspects of D&I?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think technology is a tool, right? So we should differentiate our communications and our interactions with people from the media we use to interact with those people. So I'd encourage people to engage with the tools that are currently available. You can access, all of the services that you would normally go out to access. You could interact with people. I have with my teams, we have a regular catch up, and with my social sort of community, we do have a coffee, a virtual coffee. All of these things we'll normally do by going into a Starbucks or Costa or whatever it is, and we can still have those conversations. And in some ways, we've got the opportunity now to catch up with a vast amount of people that we never had the chance to. So I think technology is a tool. It's not driving the change. The change is driven by obviously situations outside of our control, but technology is the tool to help us access those. And in terms of a diverse workforce, inclusion of other people, now is the opportunity to bring people along the journey, right? All people really need now is internet. They need a mobile device or a tethered laptop somewhere, and they can access these tools. They can go on Zoom, they can go on Teams, and all of those technology platforms to talk and to offer up their expertise at low cost. Now that's the key thing, right? So I think there's a huge opportunity for subject matter experts in West Africa, in Asia, wherever they are, to key into key topics without having to spend significant amounts of money and catching a flight and going out there to have a conversation. So it changes the way people interact in a work perspective. I think people need to accept and engage with the tools as what they are, tools, and it's a challenge because we're all making that transition, and we should be happy and pleased that we've got the capabilities to utilize and have little or no disruption to our day-to-day lives. But of course, these the mental issues are still will still be prevalent. They will exist, and we've just got to use these tools for the best.
I love how you put it, Don. You make it sound so, the way you explain things, it's so articulate and it's so reassuring and it makes it sound so simple. I'm sure everyone's thinking, oh my goodness, I'm writing all of this down now as I am. And I'm already thinking, Don, when we finish on the podcast, I want you to diagnose our digital business because I want to ask you a whole plethora of things about how we should be moving forward because you're right. It is low cost, and it is, it bodes opportunities. Whether you are as far flung from the UK as Nigeria, actually, it almost brings the world together in this smaller world. The world can be a much smaller place with technology.
Yeah, absolutely.
We could be chatting right now to America, China, Nigeria, etc., and we're all in the same place. It is, it's absolutely wonderful. So when we can harness that, I hope that all the leaders and those listening in absolutely can. And before I get carried away asking you a whole bunch of other questions, I am conscious of time, and I know you're a very, very busy man, Don. So I'm going to head into our lightning round, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
So firstly, I wonder, and I know we've talked a lot about D&I and B here, but what is diversity and inclusion and belonging to you personally?
Well, so I think personally, diversity is a wealth of perspectives. So, being privileged to have a diverse workforce means that you can have a wealth of and quality in your perspectives in decisions you make as a business or as an individual. I don't just look at it as a number. I don't just look at it as a quota that we've got to make. We've got to do these things, unfortunately. But, that's the nature of the beast. I think it's more about having the right representation, have different perspectives to ensure quality, robustness, and, thoughtful considerations are being given to every decision that's being made. I think, by including the right members of the society across the social spectrum, across the business spectrum, and actually across different backgrounds gives you not just the right PR, it doesn't give you just the right tick boxes by the end of the quarter or the end of the year, but it actually gives you a modern and more refreshed business. I think diversity for me is not something that you can point a finger at. Of course, there are diverse people, but the diversity and inclusion is actually an action that brings people into a decision process for the good of the business.
That's a very, very interesting answer. Again, what you're essentially saying is kind of diversity is actually mindsets, and that wealth of experience that we have had. Yes, there are physical diversities, be it where we're from, the color of our skin, our gender, etc., etc., etc. But there are many more invisible diversities that actually exist below that surface line that we must pay attention to. And so really bringing all those people from different elements and different strands of the community together is incredibly important.
Absolutely.
Okay, and also, what's authentic leadership to you?
Authentic leadership is just being true to yourself. I think we've got to be absolutely clear about our strengths and our weaknesses and what we're here for. Being authentic is being able to stand your ground, play to your strengths, and absolutely paying a good attention and top dollar to your weaknesses, hiring your weaknesses, and supporting your weaknesses through the process. No one's got the magic, no one's got the everything in control. You've also got, I personally have some areas in my business where I haven't really got a handle on, but I've got really great people in finance and operations that can absolutely help me with those. So it's being true to myself, bringing my best A game to the table on a regular basis. But at every point in time, everyone knows what they're going to get. And that's the key thing. Authenticity and, I would say, consistency go hand in hand. People have got to know the authentic Don is what they're going to get today, tomorrow, next week.
I love the candid honesty in which you say there that ultimately you're not perfect, that if we know our strengths and weaknesses, which I think some leaders that I speak to do struggle, because I think there is a significant amount of pressure actually on directors, managing directors, C-suite, CEOs, etc., on almost being perfect because people are looking up to them and looking to them for the answers. But like you say, when you know your weaknesses and you know that you can fit in the jigsaw puzzle of others within the team that actually play to those strengths, well, really, it doesn't matter because no one can be perfect and no one can be everything to everyone. And second to last question, who's inspired you most throughout your career or indeed your life?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So there's two people. Personally, on the personal side is Nelson Mandela. Just for the way he transformed his life. So he went from being the bad boy to being obviously the leader of a significant economy in Africa and the world, and one of the best leaders actually in the world as well. Absolutely, from a personal perspective, Mandela. From a business perspective, for similar reasons, Satya Nadella, who absolutely transformed a very big but also a challenged organization, and now CEO of Microsoft. So, I pull a lot of my inspirations from these two individuals.
Very good. And any childhood heroes or sheroes?
I would say cartoon characters. So it's Captain Planet. I don't know how many people know about Captain Planet, but you're welcome.
Do you know what? No, I know. I bet everyone is Googling furiously now if they don't already know who Captain Planet. I know who Captain America is and all the Marvel characters I'm geekily quite a fan of. But tell me about Captain Planet very quickly before I ask your last question.
Yeah, sure. So Captain Planet was, I would say, the cartoon world's first approach to diversity. So there was about 5 different people called the Planeteers, and they were from different parts of the world, and all came together to form Captain Planet, who fought for the planet and fought for all the good things that we're fighting for today, right? So I think that was amazing, and for me as a kid living in Nigeria and watching that, to see the leader of that group of the Planeteers, Kwame, a guy from Ghana, was very relatable. So, so for me, that was the entry to, the cartoon world that we all engaged with and in the diverse space, and actually said to me, you can achieve quite a lot as being yourself.
That's so lovely. And it does give a perfect example of why representation is so unbelievably important. Now, whilst we all may draw from many, many different inspirations, I certainly have throughout my career growing up, and my mum and dad, who I was adopted, so they don't necessarily look like me, but I've drawn inspiration from lots of different places, but did often wonder, hey, not many Chinese females in positions of leadership here. And so clearly it's affected you as a young child. And I do, if anyone is wondering about representation, that is a perfect example of it. Even though it is about Captain Planet, which you should all go and Google now, because he sounds super cool. And I'm going to do that as soon as we come off this podcast. But finally, I wonder if you could go back in time and you were to give advice to the young Don back when you were in Nigeria, or indeed to any child or aspiring leader who is kind of tuning in thinking, oh God, but the hill's massive, it's a long way to climb. What might you say?
I would say embrace, seek, and always anticipate change, because the trajectory to success is not a straight linear trajectory. There's always dips and peaks and sideways movements, etc., but never settle. I think that's the key thing, and that's what I've learned through my career, is that you never settle for less. Get a North Star and absolutely anticipate change through that, but be modular about it as well.
The engineer in you, I love that. Be modular. Maybe I should call the title of this podcast when it comes out, Be Modular by Don Iro. And I bet your team are listening thinking, oh my goodness, yeah, that's Don, totally. Be modular. So by way of summary, as I always do, and Don, thank you ever so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute thrill having you, and please hang around at the end because I want to ask you a bunch of questions about the business. I'm sure many people do, but I always do a summary. So firstly, thank you very, very much. I think there's been some really great standout learning pieces from today. What's been littered throughout, which I really love, is kind of some of the analogies that you have and that you so simply and articulately put, such as the North Star. Know what your North Star is, know what your strengths are ultimately. If you map out in a modular way, then you can achieve the step-by-step success that you are looking for. So what is the top of your pyramid? What is your North Star? What is it that you see your self-actualization as? It could be as weird and wonderful as whatever's in your imagination. But if you put in the step-by-step guide, it could be a couple of weeks worth of goals. It could be a couple of months or years worth of goals, but it gives you something to really harness and focus upon in order to achieve that. And of course, fulfill your personal self, which I think was fabulous. And secondly, what I really love, and clearly so because I was asking you so many questions about it, is actually utilizing technology for the power of inclusivity. And for those listening in, as Don has said, use this time of change, this time of great uncertainty to actually try out new things. What have you got to lose at the end of the day? This is a time where there are low cost opportunities available when it comes to technology. We must stay ahead of the curve. We must not be scared of it. There's experts like Don, and there's experts all around who I'm sure are willing to share their knowledge and wisdom with you. But actually, we can learn a huge amount, and we can communicate with people that we might not have otherwise done so. So let's utilize this to harness the power of digital and online communication to really harness in inclusion. And I guess finally, keep seeking out the best of yourself that you possibly can. As Don said, finally, seek, embrace, change, challenge, keep going. There are great things just around the corner, so do not give up, whatever you do. As usual, our podcast will be live on www.darglobal.org/podcast or leilamckenzie.com/podcast, where all of the show notes and all of Don's contact details will be in there as well. So get in touch. any questions, if you've been affected by anything, of course, from today's show, please do reach out. More than happy to answer those questions. And yeah, in the meantime, my name is Leila Mackenzie-Dellis, and you've been listening to the Diverse and Inclusive Leaders podcast show. We're with you every week, but we are here more frequently at the moment due to the unprecedented time, so we're here twice a week. Yeah, finally, all is to say thank you very much indeed, Don, for being with us on the show.
Thank you, Leila. I appreciate it. It was really good to be here.
Great to have you. See you all again soon. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for watching the Diverse and Inclusive Leaders podcast. Please do feel free to hit the like button below, or if you'd like to receive future notifications, do ping the notification bell here at the side. If you're interested in the audio version only, you can find it on the following streaming platforms. Any extra info and descriptions will be in the links below. Look forward to seeing you soon.